What can we learn about AI by looking at its history? I speak to Professor Mike Sharples, a professor in AI and creative writing, and he takes us through his early days researching creative writing and the use of AI to support young learners. We discuss what has changed, but also some fundamental elements of pedagogy and learning that still remain. Please join me. This is an absolute treasure. Hello and welcome. I'm Carmen Tomás, your host today, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Mike Sharples. Hi, Mike.
Hello, Carmen. I'm delighted to be here.
Okay. Mike Sharples is a very well-known academic, researcher, educator, leader, and also known as a visionary who started research on how AI supported creative writing. He started this back in the 80s, and he has since, and he's still helping us to incorporate AI into education in the best ways. So, Mike, I'm very intrigued about how it was to be researching AI in the 80s. So can you tell us about how you got into this field? Because back in the 80s, it was not such an obvious area of interest.
My journey in AI and education actually started in the early 70s because I did a really innovative computing degree at St Andrews University that had one module in AI that included AI and language generation. And I became fascinated by the generative power of language, how language is not just a way, for instance, grammar is not just a way that teachers can mark students' essays, but grammar has a generative power and language has a generative power. And also computers can harness that generative power of language and can provide a tool to be able to explore and to generate language. And then my final project as an undergraduate was a group project to implement a programming language for children. And so these two themes of computing environments for children and generative AI came together. And then in the early 90s, I went on to do a PhD at Edinburgh University on cognition, computers, and creative writing, which was about developing environments for children to explore and improve their creative writing.
What was AI like then? What could it do? Even when I started doing research in some of the early AI tools and things, they seem to be quite rudimentary. So I'm actually quite impressed that back in that time you could actually help students create stories and improve their writing. So what did the program involve back then?
So at that time we didn't have microcomputers, so we had to use mainframe computers that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, and Edinburgh was the world leader in AI at that time. So I was very fortunate to be in the world-leading AI center. And we did have some powerful environments. We used AI programming languages such as Lisp and one that was developed for children called Logo. And what's different, I think, is that you had to do everything by hand. So you had to code all the rules for generating language or for transforming language. You had to do it all by hand. You had to put in all these rules explicitly. And so just to design one tool to help children, say, generate poems or stories, it could take a year to do that. What's different now is that we've moved from that, what's called symbolic AI, towards machine learning and neural AI, which can trawl essentially the entire internet. It can access the entire textual internet and put this into this vast neural network, which can then intuit, it can then infer these rules of language. So you don't have to put them in explicitly. And then it can start to generate language. It can continue a piece of writing. And now you can give it instructions to write a story, to summarize a piece of writing, to compare pieces of writing. And it will do it on any topic. So what took me a year to do now, you can do in 2 or 3 minutes with generative AI, which is a huge difference.
Wow. Then in terms of the quality and what the children were able to be engaged with, what was the environment like or the tool?
So the sort of tools I gave children were Firstly, language generators, so they could generate simple poems, simple stories. They could transform and play with language. And we also had games, so a text-based adventure game. This is one I really enjoyed doing, and they really enjoyed. So the children imagined a haunted house, and then they wrote descriptions of each of the rooms in this haunted house and the characters in it. And then we put that onto a computer game where their written descriptions became an environment that they could explore. They could enter this haunted house, meet the characters, find the treasure, and so they could play this text-based adventure game based on all the descriptions. And so they could go from, in language terms, from descriptive writing to narrative writing. Their descriptions became a narrative they could explore. So these were the sorts of tools that we used at that time.
So how did they, I'm now very intrigued to know the mechanics of how they went from, okay, they introduced some descriptions and then that fed into a game. And then how did they come out at the other end with a narrative? Because that's the, you're saying, going from description to the narrative that makes sense and has a structure is big, right? Is not an obvious thing when you're learning to write. So how did that happen?
First thing to say, it's a crucial part of children's development is to be able to merge descriptive and narrative storytelling writing. So to be able to include descriptions in stories, that's crucial to children's creative writing development. So it's really important to be able to help them do this. And the mechanism was, firstly, they created this map of a haunted house, and I helped them to do that and all the rooms they drew out. And then they wrote little descriptions by hand of each of the rooms and also of the characters. So on cards, they wrote down descriptions of these characters. And then I put these onto this computer game. So when they came back, they would read the description of the first room, of the hallway of this haunted house, and there were cobwebs hanging down and spiders and so on. And the characters in the game that I'd developed moved from one room to another. So they would read each room, the descriptions of the room and the characters. And then we set a goal, which was to find the treasure in the room. And hidden somewhere in this house, there was treasure. So they had to move from room to room by saying, go to the next room, go north. They would give commands to the computer to go from one room to another. And all of this was done through writing, through text. And so they would explore this house by writing the commands, meeting the characters, and then eventually finding the treasure. And then, so we then had essentially all the commands and the descriptions. We had a written narrative. They would look at that, and then they would write a short story based on that. Then at the end, they would write their own story based on how they'd explored the house. And each child wrote a different one because each child had explored the house in a different way. And they loved it. They really loved it.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And in a way, you're making me think like, well, isn't that how we're now interacting with ChatGPT when we're wanting to write something? It's just making me think tools are different, but qualitatively seems like a similar type of interaction through language as well that we have nowadays. It's faster, it's more powerful.
There is a lot of similarities and there are a lot of differences. So, I mean, the similarities is that ChatGPT, we're going back to text again with ChatGPT. So it's all interacting via text. You know, write in text, you get text back from ChatGPT. But what isn't there is the whole language development and education aspect of it. So it wasn't just that children conversed with AI then. They were using it to develop their writing abilities and develop their storytelling. Now, you can design additions to ChatGPT that would help children with their writing and storytelling, but just the basic program doesn't do that. And this is one of the areas that I've really been working on now, which is to add good pedagogy, good teaching and learning on top of modern language models such as ChatGPT.
So how can you overlay and how pedagogy can be brought in? And I think you talk widely about this.
So ChatGPT and other language models are immensely powerful. They've essentially taken the entire textual internet and compressed it into this vast neural network of interconnected elements, concepts, and use it to either continue language or to receive instructions, to act as a chatbot. So they're immensely powerful, but they're not designed to support learning. In fact, there's already evidence that you kind of offload your learning onto them. You use it instead of learning. So we really need to bring good teaching and learning on top of these powerful AI tools. And so my starting point was, what is effective teaching and learning? What's good pedagogy? And we've got good knowledge now of the science of learning as to what works. So we know that helping young people to set goals works, helping them to be able to develop the ability to reflect on the output from these language models, to be able to take a critical stance. So not just accepting what's given, but saying, how could this be better? Being able to use them as tools not to do creativity on your behalf, but to enhance your own creativity. So to use them as creative tools and to help with, for instance, the design process. And so I've been looking at what I'm calling AI pedagogy roles, such as a design aid, a Socratic tutor, certain for teachers, lesson planning, designing quizzes, personalized tutoring, all of these roles that AI can take in supporting learning. And so building on top of the language models, building good education on top of them.
It is quite reassuring to hear professor that comes from a background in computer science to not give us a scary news about the end of the world. So I do really appreciate, Mike, that you make some sense of it in a very constructive manner, because it's a little bit scary sometimes with the news. But I mean, but also going back, so these learnings you're able to share now, and you're doing that, across, and you're in high demand as well because of your background. I mean, they are coming from this early research and your early experience. So can we go back a bit and sort of talk about what was the impact you found in your research, in using AI for writing? So also for whoever is listening to understand, like, what's the value and what's the impact of this?
So that was really interesting, because the aim wasn't just to develop some AI tools. It was to understand how children can develop their writing abilities. Now, around the age of 10, 11, which was the age that I worked with these children, what happens is that children start to reflect on their own cognition, on their own abilities. And in writing, they start to reflect on their own writing abilities. And what happens is they overthink it. So younger children, they just write some sentences. But once you become to age 10 or 11, you're starting to think about, is what I'm writing good? How can I improve it? And the more that you think about your writing, at that stage, the worse it gets. And so what's happening is that children aged 10 or 11 are starting to really think about their writing, starting to experiment with it, but the quality of their writing goes down and they get marked down by teachers. So it's a real dip. And a number of researchers have found that around the age of 10 or 11, children lose confidence in their writing abilities, their writing quality dips. So, and I wanted to use what we knew about children's development to help them overcome this dip. And the way we did that was to get them to think and work creatively with their writing, to realize that, for instance, there are different ways to tell a story, that you can combine descriptive and narrative writing, and that becomes more powerful. That language is something you can play with. You could play with words. You can have fun with language. It's not just something that the teacher marks and that you have to do for school. And so we developed creative playgrounds for children to be able to explore language. And it worked. These were average ability children that I worked with, developing these tools. And this was back in the very early days, just even before word processors like Microsoft Word. But with these early tools, they were fascinated by the idea that language is something that they could explore, they could play with, and they used it, for instance, to generate simple poems, which were published in a school magazine. Develop their narrative writing skills by incorporating descriptive writing in them. And it helped children, and I evaluated this, helped children to overcome this barrier of overthinking their writing.
You could use the current tools also in that same frame of mind, which is help me be more creative and help me think less, give me ideas. And then you can have a dialogue almost by using the tools we have now. I mean, it's hearing you is like, well, we can still do that, and it's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, we have even more powerful tools now. I mean, in those days, everything had to be done by hand. So it took me a year to design those tools for my PhD. Now with ChatGPT, I could develop those tools in a few minutes. So we have enormously powerful tools, but we've got to use them wisely, not to substitute for learning, but to enhance learning. And that really means understanding how children and adults learn and how you can empower them. So, if you like, the challenge is not so much now how do we develop better and faster AI, but how do we really understand how these tools can be used to support learning?
So, Mike, and again, placing this back in the present, and thank you, it's so nice to look at the past and realize that those lessons are still valuable and they're still relevant. Everything you're talking about could really definitely be useful for today's dilemmas. But I think, what is your advice when people are talking about students plagiarizing, basically getting outputs from ChatGPT? How do we need to change how we're assessing writing? And you do know, obviously, that written assessments are a huge part, are a substantial part of what students do while they're in university at many levels. So obviously you will have thought about this. So how does then assessment of writing need to change to reflect these positive opportunities that you're talking about, and in a manner that it doesn't threaten the integrity of, our education system?
Firstly, it's a huge problem, and it's a problem that's worldwide, and it's one that came very quickly, about a year and a half ago, when students started to use ChatGPT and other tools to write their essays. And there was no easy way to detect them. And there still isn't. Anybody who says that you can detect whether a student or an AI is writing an essay, you can't. And I could talk for a long time about this. So we're not going to find a simple technical solution to stopping students using AI for writing their assignments. And to some extent, if you're just setting students a 3,000-word essay that an AI can write just as well, then you should be thinking differently about assessment. And this is what universities and schools are starting to do. And I think we need to move from a product-based assessment, you're writing your essay, to a process-based assessment, which is tracking the students' knowledge. Now, you can do that in a number of ways. You can do it by setting them projects where they have to write a first draft, a second draft. You could be setting them lab work or situated work where they're reflecting on their experience of carrying out an experiment or doing a study. So it's not just that you're evaluating, assessing one thing, you're assessing a process. And we've talked for a long time about these more authentic forms of assessment, but there was never a real incentive to do it. But now there is. AI, I feel like, has forced us to rethink assessment.
Yes. But do you think that universities are the area I know better and I'm closer to? Do you think, have they moved fast enough? Are you seeing this change happening? So what's your impression in this area?
Well, I think universities are going through this whole phase of innovation, starting with fear and then denial and then reluctant change. Most institutions are still at a very early stage, either of fear or denial, and hoping that there will be a technical fix or hoping things will all go back to the way they were before. So I've worked with mainly universities over the past year, and they're all facing the same problem. I think the ones that are further ahead, and I know actually some of the Asian countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, they are starting to rethink assessment, to have usually a combination of some invigilated exams where students are in an exam hall and they can't use AI, they have to literally write their assignments out by hand, but combining that with a lot more formative assessment and project-based assessment where students are assessed on how they're progressing, not just on what they've produced at the end. Yeah. So then they're having this combined approach now of a few high stakes invigilated exams, but much more now formative and process-based assessment. And I think that's what the leading institutions are doing, but there are many that have still got to catch up.
Thank you so much. I feel like we really have traveled to the past and now brought all that to the present. I wanted to explore the connection with making the most of your vast experience in this field. And thank you, Mike. I'm going to take us, to the end. And something that I was very impressed when I found out was that you predicted that in the future, so back in the 80s, you were able to predict that computers were going to be writing. That's something, honestly, I never crossed my mind. So this is true, right? So Mike, I think I've heard this elsewhere. So you were actually, what made you predict this?
Well, so I was asked to give a talk at the major conference, British Educational Research Association conference, about the work that I was doing for my PhD. And at the end of it, to my surprise, I was sent into a room full of journalists and they started firing questions at me. And one of the questions was, will AI be able to write a book? And I said, well, yes, possibly in the future. And they started pinning me down. How soon will an AI be able to write a book? So I said, oh, probably in 20 years. Well, it turned out, that was in the early 1990s, it turned out that by the middle of the 1990s, there were some books that were already being written with the aid of AI. So it came much faster than I'd anticipated.
Yes. Well, so I'm going to now do the exact same thing they did to you in the 80s, seeing that you were quite accurate. So where do you think this technology that we have now and has everyone, where's it going to take us? What's your prediction about where we could be in the next 10, I'm not even going to say 20 years, let's say even 20 years, because it's moving so fast.
The main thing we need to think about, be worried about and excited about is that AI is going to be everywhere. It's going to be in all of the tools and the systems we use. In the same way that digital is everywhere, then in the near future, AI will be everywhere. We won't even think about it any more than we're thinking about using digital tools. And young people will grow up in an AI-infused world. So that's the first thing. It will just be natural to them that AI will be there to help them and to support them, and sometimes to confront them. I think the second thing is there's going to be a merging of all kinds of media, of games, of movies, of TV series. So, for instance, you will have interactive media that will be of movie quality where you are a character in that movie or you're a character in that sitcom. And that will be enormously engaging, but it will also be very disruptive because it will disrupt all of these media industries, particularly with the power of gaming. And then AI is going to become much more social. It's going to be embedded into social media, and we will interact with and through AI. And that's going to have a really big influence on entertainment, but also on education. AI will be able to offer tutorials, seminars facilitated by AI. You'll have your AI personal mentor and tutor, and that's going to disrupt, again, traditional education. So it's going to be increasingly difficult in the future to tell the difference between AI and human-generated media. In the same way, you can't really tell the difference between analog and digital now. Soon you won't be able to tell the difference between AI and human-generated media. So It's going to be very confusing, very exciting, and quite challenging, particularly to all of us who've grown up in a time before generative AI, where we thought we knew the difference between what's real and what isn't, what's true and what isn't, what's human and what isn't.
Can we hope for some good news?
I think the really good news is that we should be confident, particularly as educators, because, the last profession that's going to be replaced by AI is the caring profession. And teachers are a caring profession, and AI is intrinsically uncaring. So if we emphasize our human care and empathy, then there will always be a role for teachers. And we need to have confidence in how we know how students learn, we know how to teach well, and we need to build on this AI, which isn't very good at the moment, of teaching and helping students to learn. We need to have confidence in our profession, in ourselves as teachers, to be able to support young learners and to work with AI and to build on good pedagogy. good science of learning. And there's a huge opportunity there to bring that good science of learning to AI. I think so. I think students will interact naturally with AI. It will help them to do some of their initial learning, some of the things, the content provision that we do. And it may just free us up to do the things that we're really good at, which is human care, human empathy, and human knowledge and human critical faculties. So let's build on what we're good at.
Fantastic. Well, on that very positive, constructive note, I think we can end. And I just want to thank you, Mike. I've really, really enjoyed building connections with the past, because I think it'll help us look more confidently into the future. So thank you so much for your contribution and sharing.
Oh, thank you, Carmen. I've really enjoyed this session. So it's been great.